What's up, everybody? I've been home for the weekend. My truck went into the shop. I had a bad airline. I couldn't even build up enough air pressure to get into high range. So my truck went into the shop. It's ready. I'm just waiting for a ride to get down there, and then I'm going back out on the road. I've spent the last 24 hours commenting heavily on CDLLife.com's page about a new law that was proposed, new legislation that was proposed in the Kentucky legislature that would increase the fines for trucks parked longer than 15 minutes on roadsides and off-ramps. The bill states, quote, no person shall stop a vehicle, leave it standing, or cause it to stop or be left standing upon any portion of the roadway, provided, however, that this section shall not be construed to prevent parking in front of a private residence, off the roadway or street in a city or suburban area, or such parking is otherwise permitted as long as the vehicle so parked does not impede the flow of traffic. There's already a law saying you can't park there and a fine for getting caught. This merely increases the fine from $100 to $200 plus the cost of towing if applicable. The bill does address emergency situations and inclement weather. Quote, vehicles shall be permitted to stop on the shoulders to the right of the traveled roadway with all of the wheels and projecting parts of the vehicle, including the load, completely clear of the traveled roadway. Unquote. Bill also states that vehicles cannot park on a sidewalk, in front of sidewalk ramps, in front of public driveways, within intersections or crosswalks, or any place where official signs state that parking is prohibited, within 30 feet of flashing lights, stop signs, traffic controls, blah, 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 blah. Those are pretty much things that everybody should know anyways. Invariably, truckers took to tirading that FMCSA and DOT are trying to bankrupt truck drivers because they force us to park on the side of the road and then fine us for doing so. No truck driver has ever been forced to park on the side of the road or on an on-ramp or off-ramp, period. You may have chosen to park there. You may have broke down there, which is not parking. But if you parked there, that was because you did not do a trip plan of any kind. Now, when I say trip plan, I don't mean sit down and write out specifically the miles that you plan to drive, the speeds you plan to drive, the exact route you plan to take, the exact locations you plan to stop to use the restroom or get lunch or any of that. A trip plan can be as simple as, okay, I'm leaving Sparks, Nevada, and I'm heading for Virginia. I know I'm going across the 80. I know that the speed limit, at least across Nevada, Utah, and the part of Wyoming I can get across, is 70 to 80 miles an hour. I know I can drive, in my truck, for instance, which will do 80 miles an hour, the legal speed limit in Utah as well as Wyoming and Nevada. I know that I can do more than 750 miles in a day easily. So I need to start thinking about, well, where am I going to be stopping? I'm going to be getting past Rock Springs, probably going to be Rollins, maybe a little bit further, maybe not that far. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I know there's a Flying J in Rollins. I know that there's a Love's in Wamsutter. I know that there's, little podunk truck stops along the way. So I'm thinking about what are my likely targets going to be towards the end of the day. And I'm also thinking about, okay, so by the time I get to Salt Lake, maybe I'm going to want to stop and get something to eat. I know there's a Flying J in Salt Lake. I know there's, plenty of options along the way. I'm thinking about all of this stuff because that's kind of what trip planning is about. If I start my day late, and by me, and I'm referring specifically to me, if I start my day late, 10 or 11 o'clock, which I sometimes do because I just don't care about getting up, I know that I'm going to be stopping very late and parking is going to be a question. If I know that there's going to be a TA somewhere around the 750 mark in my day, I'm going to try and shoot for that. And I'm going to call ahead about halfway through my day if I still feel like I'm going to be able to make that target and reserve a parking spot. Now, I am fortunate in that my company reimburses me the cost of a reserved parking spot. But really, it's $12 to $14 to ensure that I have a parking spot. Even if I didn't get reimbursed, I would still do it if I was running the kind of miles that I run or driving the times of day that I'm driving. Because that's potentially saving me a ticket for parking illegally. It's potentially saving me the hassle of trying to find a place to park. These drivers on this forum came up with excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse for why they can't do a trip plan. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Well, what if you hit weather? Well, what if there's an accident? Well, I was driving and power lines fell across the roadway. Oh, this and all that. It's still part of trip planning. Part of your trip plan is knowing what you can and cannot do. The FMCSA Hours of Service Law has a very specific provision. The Adverse Driving Conditions provision, Section 395.1b, subsection 1. In case of an emergency, a driver may complete his or her run without being in violation of the provisions of the regulations. In this part, if such run reasonably could have been completed absent the emergency. In short, you get up to 2 additional hours. Now, a lot of drivers read that as, oh, I can drive 13 hours. No, it's up to 2 additional hours to finish your run, which can be as simple as getting to the place that you have pre-designated as your target, as your destination for your driving day. Adverse road conditions, snow that comes out of nowhere, because if you are encountering, what was it, Winter Storm Titan or whatever it was called, that's your own screw up for not checking weather reports. If there's an accident, if the power lines fall across the roadway, yeah, that's something you can't anticipate. Even if the accidents are a result of weather, that's something you cannot anticipate, and it's something that you can use the adverse driving condition exemption to alleviate your problem. Now, if you're still more than 2 hours away from your destination, if the adverse condition exemption doesn't get you to your destination, you still didn't do good enough trip planning, because you immediately should know, okay, well, I'm going to have to use the exemption. I already know I'm too far away to make it in the next 2 hours, so where can I stop before where I was going to stop, but still within 2 hours? I had guys giving me scenario after scenario after scenario of well, you can't do it with this, or you can't do it with that. Well, what about this? What about that? Guy gave me a scenario I'd like to read to you, and my response to him. I was called Billy Big Rigger. I was called a dispatcher. I was called a day cab driver, 200-mile-a-day driver, not a truck driver, never been a commercial vehicle driver, etc., etc. Because I'm telling these guys, you're not doing a trip plan, or you're not doing it very well. So this guy tells me, here's a scenario. Where's it at? Pardon me. Okay, I got a good one. This is a direct quote. I want to see how Vern Gill would plan this one for me. Or plan for this one. This morning I had a delivery to Dixon, Illinois. I get to the receiver only to find out that it was not the right address given to me by my dispatcher. I planned my trip so it only took me 4 hours to get there. Now, my dispatcher is not in today, so I talked to the sub-dispatcher in his place who had no idea what was going on. It took him almost 6 hours to get me the correct address, which is 4.5 hours away. That totals 14.5 hours, 30 minutes more than allowed on duty. What would you do, Vern? This wasn't even difficult. Well, after having driven 4 hours to get there, if I then waited an additional 6 hours for an address, my first move would have been to drive to the closest legal parking spot en route to the correct address and made my delivery the next day. Alternatively, you could have gone into the sleeper after your on-duty time when you arrived at the shipper in the first place, and 2 hours after you received the information, which would give you a full 8 hours in the sleeper berth, you could have made the 4.5-hour drive to your correct address, done your delivery, and still had an additional 2.5 hours of drive time left. But again, that requires knowledge of the HOS rules. Splitting your sleeper is still legal. You have to know how to do it. I've done it. I don't even know how many countless dozens of times I've had level 1 inspections, level 2 inspections, level 3 inspections, all with the split sleeper provision being used, and I've never been jacked up over it. The only time I've ever been jacked up over it was the first time I used it when I drove for Swift Transportation, and I did it wrong. Whoops. My first time. The point I'm getting at is, it is ridiculous the amount of drivers who have such a basic, bare bones, minimal understanding of the hours of service laws that they are subject to. This isn't stabbing in the dark and hoping you get it right. You have to know your job. I haven't even been out here half as long as half the guys that I'm friends with, and I get compliments from them because I know what I'm doing. And I hear all the complaints. Oh, it's these truck driving schools. Oh, it's these 3-week schools. I went to a 3-week school. I was in a classroom for a week. I was on a a training range, learning backing and shifting for a week. And I was on a road course for a week. And then I spent 6 weeks with a mentor after 2 days in orientation learning the Qualcomm. All of this was at everybody's favorite whipping boy, Swift Transportation. Now I average between 17 and 20 plus thousand miles a month. I had somebody tell me that it's not possible to do 20 plus thousand miles in a month legally. I showed them the math that it is actually possible, but whatever. I went through a school. I didn't just stop learning. It isn't even about the school, it's about not learning. It isn't about who taught you or how long you were there or what they tried to teach you. Some guy was like, well, that's because trip planning for most students involves just go buy a GPS. No! You can still learn. I will teach you if you want to know, and I don't even know everything. But I damn sure know more than half of the people out there, as evidenced by the people commenting on this thread. I had a woman who claims to have been, real quick, the guy that gave me this scenario and has told me that I don't know what I'm doing, I'm a day cab driver, claims that he's got all this experience, 2 years and 4 months, but his granddaddy was a driver, an owner-operator, so he knows what he's talking about. I don't care how long you've been doing this. I don't care how many miles you drive. I don't care how fast your truck is. I don't care how many states you've been in or how many Canadian provinces you go in on a regular basis. If you know your job, you know your job. If you don't know your job, I'm going to know you don't know your job, and I'm going to call you on it. This woman who claims to have been driving for several years herself and her husband, she and her husband have their own truck and run their own business, told me flat out, it's not possible to legally run 750 miles a day. A friend of mine who's a driver who drives for Kelly's Transportation, Trucking, whatever it is, KTS, everybody knows those trucks, came in and said, listen, I'm on a 64 mile an hour truck with E-logs. I can do 700 miles in a day. He's not on E-logs, and his truck goes a lot faster than mine. If you think he can't do 750 a day, you're an idiot. And she is. There is no, you can't do this blanket statement that applies. Sure, you can say I can't legally do 650 miles in a day in California, but I can damn sure drive 650 miles in a day in California. The point is, I'm not attacking anyone when I say you're not doing your trip plan very well. If you are looking for a spot at the end of the day and can't find one and end up parking on the side of the road and end up paying a fine because of it, it's because you didn't do a trip plan. And the response to me telling you it's because you didn't do a trip plan should not be attacking the amount of miles that I drive, attacking me and claiming that I'm not a driver, attacking me and telling me that I must be an Obama lover, which I am, by the way, for anybody that was curious. I love Obama. I voted for him twice. Let's just get that out of the way. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has simply to do with the fact that you did not do a trip plan. I went to the Bay Area, Fremont, California. I actually delivered a load from Eloy, south of Phoenix, excuse me, to Daly City, which is north of San Francisco. From there, I went to Fremont. Now, everybody knows there's no parking in the Bay Area. I was hoping to get in and out of my shipper quickly, but as I had been there before, I knew that wasn't likely, and so I came up with a backup plan. As anticipated, it took a lot longer to get loaded, and I was almost out of time. And I was almost out of energy because I had already started my day at 5 o'clock, and I didn't want to be driving late into the night. So I did what I had already anticipated I might have to do as part of my plan. I paid for a motel room at a motel that had truck parking. Now again, I'm fortunate that I get reimbursed for my motel room, but it doesn't matter. It's still my obligation to find a legal place to park. That's part of the hours of service provision when you take your break, is you have to be in a legal designated parking spot. And side of the road, ramps, not included. My tirade is over because I think you guys are going to get tired of it anyways. But learn the hours of service, people. If you have questions, ask someone. Don't go blithely through the world acting as though the government owes you a parking spot. Nobody owes you anything. If you go to truck stops and you don't spend money, don't be surprised that they're going to start charging you to park there. If you go to a rest area and you throw trash on the ground, don't be surprised when they start closing them. And if you believe that you shouldn't have to pay any taxes, don't be surprised when the public services, such as rest areas and truck parking areas on the sides of the roads, don't get built because there's no tax revenue to build them. And don't cry to me about how much it costs in taxes to run your business. You have a business. You're better off than a vast majority of society, not just in America, but in the world. Pay your goddamn taxes.